I'm Mary Jo Webster. I'm the data editor at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. I'm also a board member of the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information, which is a nonprofit that promotes transparency in government. This session is going to be about how to file a good public records request. It's going to tell you a lot of things that you could use, whether you're asking for paper copies of documents that government might have. But there's a lot of stuff in here that is really pertinent if you're asking for data, something coming out of a database, something that you expect to be in a spreadsheet. Those are the ones that get a little more tricky than simply asking for a government report. So let's get started. So I'm going to give you advice that is general enough that it will probably apply to any public records law in any state. Of course, I am in Minnesota, and so these things are very pertinent to Minnesota's public records law. But you should make sure you understand your law, I guess, to help you write these letters in the best way possible. But this will get you started. So most public records laws work on the idea that you can ask for data that the government has and they created and or they have in their possession, and it's usually a thing. So documents, data, video, audio, other things. We can't. The state laws don't allow us to just ask a question like we would in a press conference or something like that. So you have to figure out what documents or data they would have in their possession that would answer the question, your burning question, right? So, stupid example here. Let's say you want to know how much money the city spent on toilet paper last year. You would have to ask for invoices or other documents that show payments the city made for toilet paper over the course of the entire year. And then you'd probably have to add that all up yourself, but that is the idea of how it would get you there. So before filing a request, you need to do some homework. I highly advise that you not just craft a request and email it off instantly as soon as you decide you want something. I would say that 90% of the problems I've seen journalists have with data requests are that they did not do that homework, and they could have avoided a lot of headaches if they had just done a little bit of homework. And this might be one phone call. It might take a little longer. It depends on the complexity of what you're asking for, but it's worth the time and effort. And I think it also makes it a little more efficient and friendly process with the government agency that you're dealing with. So really, it's just being a reporter and asking a lot of questions. You want to make sure you understand what they have, how it's stored, how they created it, what might be in there, what's not in there. Does it contain what you truly think it contains? And I'm going to go over a few more questions in a minute, but this is especially important if you're getting something out of a database, because it's just not as simple as saying, can you please give me that document that you created and shared with the city council last month. That's a much simpler ask. So here's why, and here's an example of one where this could have been avoided if she had done some homework first. A reporter asked for data on all individuals whose foster care license had been suspended or revoked in the previous 5 years. And she asked for their name, address, date the license was obtained, the date it was suspended or revoked, and the reason for the revocation suspension. The agency absolutely freaked out on her, and they were saying it was going to cost something like $5,000, and it would take many, many weeks. And the reporter was just flummoxed. She didn't know what to do. She came to me, and we asked for a meeting with the agency, and they put like 10 people on a phone call with us. This is pre-pandemic times, so we didn't have video chat. It was me and the reporter with these like 10 people, and they started going on and on about how hard this was going to be. And I just was really puzzled, like, why? And I finally asked them, well, why is this so hard? And it turns out that the database that they had included a lot of these things that she was asking for, but it did not have a column in the data for the reason for the revocation and suspension. And that was only stored in paper records. And the government agency wrongly assumed that they would have to basically make new data, and they would have to add that as a column into the spreadsheet before they gave it to her. And under Minnesota law, they're not required to do that, so they were going above and beyond. But just the fact, if they had just simply told her that one piece of information is not in there, it would have alleviated a lot of headaches. So then I asked, well, what if we revised the request and just took off that reason, and just asked for the other items? And they kind of chuckled a little bit and said, oh yeah, we can get that to you this afternoon, no charge. And they did. I've also discovered in the last 5 or 6 years that asking for a meeting up front before you write your request letter can be super helpful. I've gone to them, several agencies, especially our state agencies in Minnesota, and said, I'm looking to ask for data related to, XYZ, and I don't understand what you may or may not have. I don't understand this topic super well. I'm hoping you can give me some insights so that when I do write my official request, I will have done it in a way that you guys will understand it, that it will be only asking for things you truly have, and that it'll just generally make that process easier and more efficient for everyone. And I've gotten really good response on this, and I think it has helped smooth the process on many things. So ask. So some other questions you should ask. A big one is, what's the universe? How far back in time? So universe can be a bunch of things. It can be time, like how many years or months or weeks of data, of information do you want? Do you want, paper copies of all the meeting minutes from the last 10 city council meetings, all of them over course of a year or 2 years or 5 years? Also, anything about what items or places, events, organizations, things that might be included. You might want all police reports at a particular address, but maybe you only want police reports that involved gun violence. You see how it could be a wide variety of things of what that universe is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, because it's a tough one to really wrap your brain around. But the most common one, though, is time. And you do want to use dates rather than saying things like in the past year, because in the past year or last year or anything like that is vague. So use specific dates. So I want all reports of gun violence between January 1, 2022 and December 31, 2022, like real specific dates. You could say I want all since January 1, 2022 to the present. You could use that wording to try to get as current as possible, especially if you think it might be a while before they fill your request. And then hopefully then they will give you data that goes up till the time that they fill your request. You want to ask what they use the data for, especially if you're asking it for a database. Do they generate any reports from it? Those reports might also be useful for you to look at before you write your request. It's also really insightful to understand, is this just kind of a file keeping system and they don't ever look at their own data? Or do they actually analyze it in some way and truly understand it? I've seen agencies go both ways. And if they're just using it to store, like, basically maybe an index of everything they did or inspections that they did or something, and they don't actually ever study the data themselves, I find that there can be a lot more errors in those databases, and maybe they don't. Also, maybe they aren't using it in a way that you might use it for analysis. Another big one, how is this created? Does someone type this information in? Does it come from a form that public people fill out. If it's inspections, for example, is the inspector typing this in, on an iPad while they're out at the restaurant, or do they come back to the office? Do they type it in there? One reason to ask this question is, here's an example. A reporter from the New York Times tried to get data on prescriptions written for children. It happened to be in Minnesota, actually, and she was finding these, when she started looking at the data, she was finding all these weird things where doctors in northern Minnesota were writing prescriptions for children in the Twin Cities metro, which is many hours farther south. It seemed very unlikely, and that certain doctors seemed to be writing huge amounts of prescriptions. Just a lot of very weird things. She came to discover after the fact that the name of the doctor was typed into the database based on the signature on the prescription. And the clerk who was doing it admitted that, yeah, I can't really read a lot of those signatures, and so we don't always get it right. And so it turned out she couldn't use that data, that portion of that data, to look at specific doctors because it was inaccurate. But understanding that how it gets created is helpful. And if it is typed in by a lot of different people, you will see a lot of inaccuracies and inconsistencies, and that's good to know up front. How frequently is this information updated? Once a year, once a month, every day? That can help you also to determine what universe you want to get. Will anything be redacted or withheld? Or to the example I gave you a minute ago, something that's just not there. You want to know that up front. Yeah, what's not included in the data that I might expect to be there. So, for example, Minnesota has a data set of all car accidents, but really it's not all car accidents. It's only those where there was a fatality or an injury or property damage of a certain amount or more. You probably noticed that a lot of these questions seem to apply mainly to like database type information that you're asking for, but you still may want to have the same kind of understanding for any paper reports or documents. Let's say you're asking for a document that the city council reviewed regarding a proposal for a development. You want to know who created it and when they created it. Is anything going to be redacted or withheld? Maybe what's in there, what's not in there. Maybe the document isn't going to be useful for you if it doesn't have what you're looking for. So you don't want to waste your time and the agency's time, of course, in those situations. So let's go back to the universe. That can be super tricky. So I've put together a few examples that can help kind of illuminate what that might look like. So let's say you want enrollment data broken down by gender and some other factors for the University of Minnesota. Well, first of all, the University of Minnesota is actually a system, but they have different campuses. So do you just want the Twin Cities campus, or do you want the whole system? How many years worth of data do you want? And they go by school years, so it's September to May. And so the 2018-2019 school year through the 2022-2023 school year. Do you want undergraduates, graduates, or both? And then you also want to, one of the questions here, you might want to understand, when is this data measured? This is a snapshot in time. If you ask the University of Minnesota about this, they're going to tell you, we collect the data, it's based on fall enrollment, and we collect it at the start of the semester, so it might not be the same number of people who are actually on campus when December rolls around, and definitely not when the second semester rolls around in the spring. So that's a good thing to understand about that universe. Here's another example. You want to ask for parking ticket data for the city of St. Paul, but in that case, Ramsey County, the county actually keeps the data. They're the ones who write the tickets, and well, they store the data for the police department, and so they have tickets that have been written anywhere in Ramsey County. So do you just want the ones within the boundaries of the city of St. Paul, or anything written anywhere in Ramsey County? Another example. This is one that I only figured out after talking with the agency ahead of time. Is that, I thought it'd be really simple to ask for data on gun-related incidents in the city. Well, it's not that simple. There are various codes that they use to identify different types of crimes, and how they define gun-related incidents includes a whole host of codes. So then you need to decide, do you want all of those codes? Is that the same kind of universe of what you would consider gun-related incidents? Because I think it could include somebody saying they heard gunshots, all the way up to a murder occurred, and all the things that might fall in between that. So is that really what you want? And then you also need to decide, do you want the calls where the police actually wrote up a report and they found something, or everything, even the ones where there was a report of a gunshot but the cops got there and found nothing and they didn't do anything, didn't write up a report? And then, of course, how many months, years worth of data? And that question also is really dictated by what you're hoping to say. Like, do you want to say that this year was worse than last year? Then that dictates what information you have. So, for example, I did a story like this once where we published in the summer, and so we asked for all gun incidents from January through June of the current year, and then also January to June of the previous year, so we had an apples to apples comparison between the two. And that's something you got to think about before you write this letter. Okay, so how the process works. Generally, and I think this is true in most states, there is a person at the agency who's kind of the responsible authority, or the person who is most knowledgeable about public records requests. They might have for journalists especially, they might have a system where you have to go through the public information officer or some process like that, but you want to figure out what that process is. We're seeing a lot of agencies now starting to use data request portals instead of email, so you fill out an online form and hit submit. Whatever that process is, you want to understand that process before you jump in. And then and I'm going to say this again later, you got to keep a paper trail of, even if you're using a portal, what it is you wrote, how you worded it, when you sent it, who you sent it to. All those things need to be documented. I would recommend either in printed out paper or PDFs, or some sort of copy stored on your computer somewhere where you know you won't lose it. Okay, so writing a good request. You want a very specific listing of what you want, including the universe of data in terms of time and scope, and all those things we talked about regarding universe. Think carefully about the wording. So, for example, I had a colleague who asked for a list of all car accidents that involved someone texting and driving, and what she got was a PDF with and I think she asked for what county it occurred in, and what she got was a PDF that literally listed out a date and a county of each incident where there was an accident involving texting, and there was nothing else in that PDF, just those two pieces of information. And she didn't ask for all the different pieces of things that she might want. I'd avoid, unless, using the word report, unless it's truly like that's part of the name of it, like the City of Golden Valley's report on affordable housing, like that's maybe where you use that word. But otherwise, trying to be very descriptive of what it is you're asking for. you can ask to either inspect data or get copies, especially if it's paper. In Minnesota, inspecting data is free, so you go to the agency at a set time that's prearranged during business hours, and you look at the paper copies, and then if you want to make copies, you can get copies at that time. But generally, copies sometimes will cost money, so that's something to keep in mind. You also want to think about how you want to transfer it to you. You may want to say, I'm assuming you have this as an electronic document that is either in a PDF form or could be transmitted to me in a PDF form and sent via email. Some wording like that, making it really clear how it's going to, the format of it and how it's going to get to you. Some boilerplate language you're going to want to have. If any or all of this request will be denied or redacted, please notify me in advance in writing. And then here's where your state law may be different, but in Minnesota, we say, including the specific state statute that categorizes this information as not public. There should be something similar in your state about something about why that it's not public, and do not settle. You can't settle for, oh, you can't have that. They need to prove it to you, unless you have a really bad state records law that doesn't let you do that. Include, if there will be any cost, please provide a written estimate in advance of filling my request. I've seen a couple of reporters not do this and then get charged like $500 unexpectedly. I can tell you the bosses do not like that. If you're a journalist, you can ask for a fee waiver and say, I'm working on behalf of the public. That does work occasionally, but not always. If you have a particular deadline, ask nicely for them to get you the data by a particular date. I've increasingly been finding a lot of agencies seem to want a deadline. I'm not entirely sure why, but telling them, giving them a date that's 2 or 3 weeks out, even if you're not pressed for time on this, giving them something to shoot for might help. Make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And then, of course, put your contact information, ask them to contact you with any questions, or, you're open to a follow-up meeting or anything like really specific about that you are very eager to talk to them about this. Oh, okay, a little bit more if you're asking for bulk data, like something from a database. Some sort of wording about that format. So please provide the data in a machine-readable format, such as comma-separated values text file. And I've recently been adding in something like, I will be working with the data in MySQL or whatever software I'm going to do, especially if I know it's a very large data set and that it would be too big for Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or anything like that. Here's the reason I've started doing this. I had a colleague file a beautiful public records request with the Minnesota State Patrol. He was asking for dispatch data, which is going to be a very large data set. He was going to work with it in MySQL, so he was totally prepared for a very large data set. But in his request, he simply said, please provide it as a comma-separated values text file. The agency started telling him, well, this is going to take us a lot of time. We're going to have to spit it out in batches of about 60,000 records each. And, it's going to cost money. It's going to take time. And the reporter was really just at wit's end, kind of like not sure what to do with it. So I got involved, and I finally got someone on the phone who knew how the data was set up and what they were going to do. And he finally explained to me, well, your reporter said he was going to use it in Excel. And I'm like, no, he didn't. But because he said CSV file, they automatically assumed that the reporter would use Excel. And so they thought, oh, this file is going to be too big for Excel, so we got to do it in batches. And once I explained to him, no, the reporter's going to use MySQL, then the guy was like, oh, no problem. We can get that to you this afternoon in one big file. And they did. So So I've been adding in, especially if it's a big one, I'll add in, if I'm asking for GIS files, I'll tell them I'm using ArcGIS or QGIS or whatever GIS software you're using. And that also puts puts them at ease that they know you are capable of handling this data set when you get it. Also, super important, please provide any data documentation, such as a record layout, data dictionary, codebook, or any other documents that are necessary for me to understand the data. Notice I have some language that might be a little redundant: record layout, data dictionary, codebook, and then any other documents. I've found that some agencies use different terminology for what this documentation might be. So cast a wide net here on what that might be. The other thing I've discovered is if the data you're asking for is stored in a relational database where there's multiple tables of information, let them know you're okay or not with getting it in multiple tables or multiple files. I've had a few agencies, when I did not say this in my request, they would just assume I wanted a flat file with all the fields joined together, and then they would charge me for the time they took to join all the data together. And oftentimes that bill would be kind of steep. So keep that in mind. Okay, I've got a couple of examples here of that top part, the universe, the kind of wording of how you want to put things together, especially the universe. I don't have that boiler language down at the bottom about what to do with redaction and how to transfer it to you and all of that. That's pretty boilerplate, but these top ones. So let's say you want to look at child care license holders, inspections of their facilities, and details on violations. After talking with the agency, I learned that this is all stored in separate data files. There's one table for the license holder, there's another table that tracks each inspection, and another table that tracks the violations that were incurred in each of those inspections. So this is a relational data set, and but it is all stored separately. So I'm making it really clear in this request that I understand it's separate files, and I'm good with that. Just please make sure you include the unique identifier that will be needed to join those tables together. And then that universe of data, notice I have a date span, but I also have which license holders do I want. So I want anyone who had a valid license at any point between that date and the end date. You want to make clear on stuff like this. This is true with like restaurant inspections or kennel inspections or any of this, any situation where you're talking about a license holder, because the license holders can change from 1 month to another. Think about, do I want everyone who held the license as of January 1, 2022, or do I want anyone who held the license throughout that previous year, or during that all of 2022, regardless of whether they didn't have it at the end of the year? Those kinds of things to keep in mind. And then here's another little wording that you might want to use. Please include all public fields of information, including but not limited to, and then blah blah blah. Some things you want to make sure you definitely have. And then I've been very clear about the inspection data and violation data. The next example also gives you a little bit more about that. Please include all public fields of information. But this would include but not be limited to, and I've rattled off a whole list of things: employee ID number, full name, pay period, dates, pre-tax compensation, etc. If you want to be sure you get certain things, put them in here in a list, but don't only put the list. Say, I want all public fields of information that includes but not limited to, and on you go. That kind of covers your butt in terms of what you ask for. A couple things: paper trail. have it all written down. It'll be, if you have to fight an agency, you're going to need it in writing. And by fight, I mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean going to court, but you will need it in writing. Check in with the agency, ask for an update every week, every other week maybe, depending on how long you think it'll take them. Get on the phone and call them if they aren't responding. I have been stunned of how many times, maybe I let it go 2 or 3 weeks and then I check in with them and say, how's my request going? And then poof, suddenly an hour later, there's my data. And it just made me wonder if they somehow had forgotten about it or were just sitting on it for some reason and then didn't do anything until I got back to them. So, and then finally, get the data even if your deadline has passed. This is super important. So this is especially true if you have to go to the office and get paper copies or something like that. But you want to follow through and you want to get the data, because we do not want agencies to think that if they just drag their feet long enough, we will go away and we won't come get the data and we won't care. So follow through, even if your deadline is passed, and you never know, maybe that information will be important for something else down the road. But do it to help everyone else out. That's it for this session. Thank you.